The Black Knights have arrived with Lelouch in the Zero costume and Kallen the Black Knight's uniform plus their nightmare frames. But should you summon these new characters? Well, in today's video, I will go over both the characters, their nightmare frames, and I'll give you my analysis of these characters from someone who's been playing this game for over a year and a half. Let's get to it. So here is the new banner. Before I talk about Lelouch and Kallen, let me show you one key thing here. We didn't just get Lelouch and Kallen, we also got Ogi, Tamaki, Millie, and Shirley. And that's important because these are all really good rank 2s, especially Tamaki and Millie. If you want, I can discuss these characters in a separate video. Now to going over Zero and Kallen. Let's start with Kallen here. She is a rank 3 assault pilot. She has very high attack at 796, which is a tad bit lower than Cornelia, who has 900%, but not too much lower. She's got 15 cost, which is kind of high, and the rest of her stats are pretty standard for an assault pilot. You see here that she has more melee attack or short range attack, so obviously put her in a melee nightmare frame, which makes sense because she comes with her own Borai. Now for her abilities, the first one is a attack boost of 35% for 17.5 seconds after a set amount of damage is dealt, received, or healed. That relates to the defensive and attack values. I can cover that in a separate video if you are curious. And her other ability is that she has a cost reduction by 3, which is not terrible, and if you combine her with the new C2 that just came out, it's actually a reduction of 4, or you can use Rakshata to get it down by 2. So either way, you can get Kallen down pretty low if you think 15 is too high of a cost to pay, which it kind of is. Now, for my thoughts on Kallen as a whole, she's a great substitute for Cornelia. She'll come in handy for the faction wars where you can only use Black Knight pilots as maybe your main attacker going forward. And even if you have Cornelia, I still think it's worth getting this Kallen because she combos well with her. She goes well with Cornelia's Gloucester, and obviously her own nightmare frame is not bad either. In terms of damage output, I think Uribe still beats her, and obviously Cornelia does as well. But this Kallen overall is a solid attacker, very good for the Black Knights faction, and definitely a nice bonus to get if you do acquire the new Lelouch. This Kallen is not bad now, but she'll become even better when we get the Gurren Mark II, because the pilot that comes with the Gurren Mark II does not have the same attack power as this Kallen. So in some ways, it might be better to use this Kallen with the Gurren Mark II than the Kallen that actually comes with it, especially if you only summon that new Kallen maybe once or twice and you have this one fully maxed. So that's something to look forward to, as Kallen could be a good long-term investment in the game. Now I will say right now in the current Japanese version, this Kallen is not used that much because they power crept her several times with better Kallens, but for right now, she's one of the best attackers in the game, and when the Gurren Mark II comes out, you'll find out that the two are a very powerful combination. Until then, you can use her with Cornelia's Gloucester or her own Borai. And speaking of that, let's talk about her Borai. Okay, here's her Borai, and it is a ground nightmare frame. We don't have float units yet, but still. It also has a melee weapon that has 230 damage, which is not bad. The cost is 4, which is actually pretty good. The base range is 1 spot ahead. The special range is the same as the other Glasgow, so it surrounds you, which is also really good. It only attacks one enemy though, and it deals 2.75 times your attack power to that enemy. Here are my thoughts on this nightmare frame. In both my Japanese accounts, I did get this nightmare frame quite frequently, but I never used it because I already had Cornelia's Gloucester or Lancelot's or just something better. But in my current global accounts, I don't have either. So I actually understand now why this nightmare frame is better than what I initially thought. For starters, if you have the defense of Kallen, this is obviously the better nightmare frame to use with her. Her Glasgow is really good for someone like Jeremiah because of the low cost, but the damage output is terrible. This thing is way better than that. In fact, I believe this has more base attack than Cornelia's Gloucester, and the only thing with more attack than it is Gilfrid's Gloucester. So it's definitely up there in terms of attack power. The skill range is very good, and also it will boost the skill power of both Kallens in the game. So there's a lot of added bonuses with this nightmare frame, and it does have pretty low cost, which is good for other annihilators in the game, like Cornelia or Uribe. Cornelia not so much because you obviously have her Gloucester, but for Uribe, yeah, this could work really well for him if you've been using a Borai Kai. high. So overall, I do like this Nightmare frame more than I originally did when the game first came out. So I may not use this in the Japanese version because there are so many better Nightmare frames currently in the game. But for the global one, this is definitely one of the better ones we have currently available to you. Unless of course you have lots of Gloucesters, then I understand why you wouldn't use this Nightmare frame, or Lancelots for that matter. But then again though, like I said, this does boost Kallen's skill, and that's something the Lancelot or Cornelius Gloucester cannot do. Now let's go on to the main event, Lelouch in the Zero costume. Okay, let's click on him right here. Zero is a rank 4 strategy type pilot who has a fast redeployment time because of course he does. He is a strategy type pilot. He has very high range attack, over 900, which definitely makes him better than Valletta in that department. But Valletta I still think is a better overall range attacker, which I'll get to in a moment. And because Lelouch is a strategy type pilot, his effects relate to being deployed and then withdrawn and redeployed throughout the battle. And let's get to those effects. So his first effect is a twofer. On deployment, he will attack all enemies by 40% of his total attack, and he will also increase the attack power of all deployed Black Knight ally units by 35% for 27.5 seconds. Both of those effects are really powerful as it gives Lelouch a way to both attack the enemy just on deployment and boost all the Black Knight pilots by a considerable amount. The other ability is not bad either, where once the combat begins, his Nightmare Frame skill gauge increases by 87.5%, and his redeployment time is reduced by 38.8% during combat. I believe that if you use his Borai, his Nightmare Frame skill gauge will go up to 100% instead of 87.5%. So the question is, even though this unit came out so long ago in the Japanese version, why is this Zero still the best character in the game, consistently ranking in the top tier? Well, the reason why is because the abilities have only gotten better as more pilots have come out and as the game has become harder. Lelouch's first ability to attack all enemies in range by 40% of his damage is something that comes up all the time, especially when you're facing really difficult bosses in the game. Now for right now, I don't know if those are in the game, but later on, there are just certain bosses that have so much health that literally if you do not use Zero, you cannot kill them. He's literally the best boss killer in the game and will be for a very long time because that 40% attack, it bypasses other things like shields and things of that nature because he's not attacking them directly, he's just reducing their health by 40% of his attack power, if that makes any sense. Other abilities in the game don't necessarily work that way, which is why Lelouch's power is very unique in that respect. In fact, there's still no pilot in the game that I'm aware of that does exactly the same thing. You do have pilots like Jeremiah and Maribel and Suzaku down the road who do attack on deployment, but I'm pretty sure that Lelouch's ability is unique compared to those. Now that's one thing to consider. The ability to increase the attack power of all the Black Knights is always going to be relevant and has only gotten better because we've gotten so many awesome Black Knight pilots in the game. So obviously using Lelouch just as a means to deploy, increase your attack power, then withdraw him is extremely useful. And that's just one way to utilize him. You also have, like I said, the boss killing aspect, and you could use him for both things. Attack the enemy and increase your attack power, which is a very deadly combination. Another thing to note is that Lelouch increases his Nightmare Frame skill gauge really quickly. He also has one of the fastest rate of attacks in the game, especially in the Borai, and this is him right now, but that's only going to get better when we get Taizo in a few banners from now, who increases the speed of all deployed Black Knight pilots by I believe 1.45 or 1.75, I don't entirely remember, but think about this, if Lelouch already has a fast rate of attack right now, imagine how much faster it becomes when you place Taizo on the battlefield. And these are just some of the basic applications of this new pilot. That's why he's so powerful. Attacks enemies on deployment, boosts the attack power of all Black Knight pilots, increases his own Nightmare Frame skill gauge by almost 100% just on deployment, and has one of the highest rates of attack in the game. Put all that together and you have one of the best pilots in the game. Now one thing about Lelouch I don't like is his health and defense are pretty crappy. He will die a lot. He is very squishy, which makes sense because he is a strategy type pilot, and strategy type pilots are not meant to be placed on the battlefield for long term, although you can with Lelouch. That's why I think Dalton and Valletta are better long range attackers for the majority of the battle, but they cannot compete with Lelouch's insane abilities. Now the thing is, while he does have low defense and health, if you use him with his Nightmare Frame, it does compensate for that. So let's talk about his Nightmare Frame. So here is Lelouch's Borai, or Zero's Borai. Now, I have a love-hate relationship with this Nightmare frame. If you've watched any of my previous tier lists, you'll know that, because on one hand, I acknowledge the fact that this Nightmare frame is very powerful, but I also hate certain aspects of it. So let's go over its stats. It has 200 attack, it hits 2 enemy units in range. The base and the skill range are the same as the Sarlin or the Lancelot, which is always appreciated. And in my opinion, this is the best range for any Nightmare frame with a ranged weapon. I know I use the same word twice, but I don't know a better way to describe it. Now, for the special, it attacks 3 enemies within range at 2.75 times the attack power and applies stealth to the unit for 8.75 seconds. I was alluding to the stealth part earlier when it comes to the new Lelouch, because while he is easy to kill, if he is cloaked, you can't hit him. That's why that second ability is really important. It's also really good for healers, which you may not have thought about, because if you want them to stay alive, you can use a special and they cloak themselves so the enemy cannot target them. So the Nightmare frame has 2 really powerful uses with both obviously the new Zero and also with any healer pilot. Now, here's the thing. Its abilities are really powerful. It also has a very fast rate of attack. Now, my problem with this Nightmare frame is the cost, which is 10, which is really high. In one of my Japanese accounts, I must have summoned Zero a bunch of times and I got so many Borais, but I didn't use them because it cost too much to deploy. I preferred the Sutherland, which doesn't do as much damage for the special, but has more base range. It only costs 6 to deploy when fully upgraded, and this thing costs 10. I know what you're thinking. 10 versus 6, is that a huge difference? Yes, it is a very huge difference. And that's why I don't like this Nightmare frame, because it costs so damn much to place. Everything else about this thing is fine. It's got really solid attack stats. It attacks more enemies than other Nightmare frames in the game. And the special is very solid. But that cost is so frustrating. And I remember the upgrade cost was more expensive than the Sutherland. Also, keep in mind, in one account I had a bunch of Lancelots, so obviously using Zero's Borai wasn't as necessary. But if you don't have lots of Lancelots, then I guess I can see the use of this. But the deployment cost was always a deterrent to use this Nightmare frame. Now, something else unrelated you might want to know. In the current missions for the current chapter coming out, they're actually giving away a Borai Diesel. If I go down here a little bit. And this Borai Diesel is actually really powerful, and so I recommend, if you can, beat the story and get this Nightmare frame. It's much better than the previous Borai, and it also combos with the main character whenever we get him. As you see here, it has 220 attack, it has a cost of 8, and attacks 3 enemies in range, dealing 2.75 times your attack power, which is better than Zero's Borai in terms of its deployment cost and attack power, but obviously the special is a little worse. But still, don't neglect this Nightmare frame, and if you don't get it now, you'll have to wait for a while before it becomes free again. It will be added to the store though. But honestly, if you're going to be shopping for Nightmare frames anyways, using your own money, then you should just buy the Lancelot or Cornelius Gloucester and not this. So take advantage while you can. If this is your first banner in Code Geass Lost Stories, then I recommend checking out 2 videos that will help you out as a beginner, my comprehensive guide and my top 10 tips for beginners. Go check those out right now.